Hey guys, it's Kai from Lucas Lane & Royals. Hope you're doing well. Today is part 2 of this DIY rack build, and I'm going to be showing you how I set up the heating component. I finally got around to completing this DIY rack build. As you can see, it's completed. I have the controller and heat on, and I'm just working on fine-tuning the temperature before I can put my animals in it. In part 1 of this 2-part series, I built the skeleton as well as the base, which includes casters to allow it to roll around easily. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest you go take a look at it. I'll put a link to that video down in the description below. This video is part 2, and I'm going to be showing you how I create heat pads and wire up the temperature controller that I like to use, which is an STC1000. I'm going to be building heat pads that are specific to the STC1000 or similar temperature controllers. If you're not familiar with those and you have something that's more plug and play, I can show you how to create heat pads for those as well a little bit later in this video. For now, let's start building. So what I want to do is build a heat mat using heat tape and some wiring. But before you get your heat tape, there's a couple things to consider. And you'll want to take a look at your tubs. So the tub that I have here, you can see it's a smooth round bottom, and it just slides back and forth inside the rack. So imagine this being the back of the rack. So the heat tape that you want to get when you have this is something that's going to extend across the entire back. But more importantly, you want to make sure that it's going to be able to extend outside on the side, because these are the points you're going to use to connect your wires. So if it didn't extend outside, then the tub, as it goes in and out of the rack, it will catch onto the wire and cause some rubbing. So you'll want to make sure that you have plenty of clearance. Now the tubs that I'm going to be using for this particular build, you can see has these little feet at the bottom. It's got one on each corner. So imagine this being the back, and if we use the same idea as earlier, a heat tape that extends the full length and extending a little bit beyond the side, that won't work in this case because the feet are going to, as you can see, you can hear that clicking sound. That's because it's catching on the heat tape as it slides back and forth. Now, even though I can put metal tape or metal foil, it'll help a little bit, but it's unnecessary risk. So what I want to show you is if you use a different method, and I'm just using a little bit thicker heat tape. I think this is 6 inches, I believe. So now, because the feet are here and they're raising the entire tub by about 1/4 of an inch, I have the option of sliding the heat tape in this way and having the 2 solder points for the connection, for the wire connection out here. And so just have to make sure that this tub touches the back of the rack and stops right before it gets to the connection points. Now, because the feet are raising the entire tub 1/4 of an inch, I also have the option of making sure that the connection points are very thin or low profile, so that it might even be able to glide completely over the heat tape. So that's what I'm going to try to do, but if I can't, then I'll just have it just stop right here, making sure that the tub touches the back of the rack before it gets to these 2 connection points. Now earlier I showed you one of these. This is just a regular extension cord, which I cut down into many sections. The length of the section is going to depend on the build. So the length of the wire is going to depend on your situation. So depending on how you position the heat tape, imagine this being my heat tape, I need to measure from the connection point, take into consideration where the distance is from the heat tape to the back of the tub, and then leave enough, about 5 inches, to be able to splice and connect to the power source. So with each section of the wire, you basically want to prep it so it looks like this. And to do that, all you have to do is snip in between the 2 wires and then pull them apart. After you pull them apart, take a pair of pliers or wire strippers or wire cutters and just remove a little bit of the sheathing, just like that. And do it to both ends. And then just twist the wires together to make them nice and neat. Now comes the time to connect the wires to the heat tape. And I like to use a process called soldering. And you can get these soldering kits from your home improvement store. Home Depot, Lowe's sell these. So it's pretty simple. It just comes with this heating iron or wand. You need some soldering flux and then the actual solder itself. So I'm going to do this in real time. I'm not going to do any editing. Just setting things up for myself, make it easy. Now here's a wire that was prepped. And I like to keep the copper threads tightly wound. And this is one of the heat tapes. So basically what I'm going to do is solder these 2 points to the 2 copper strips. And what I want to do first, I'm using a piece of wood here because this will be hot. You don't want to use metal because when you solder, it'll probably bond to the metal. You don't want to use anything like paper or plastic. That'll just burn or melt right through. So wood will burn, but very slowly, and not going to keep that hot tip on the wood for very long. So to prep, first dip the copper into the flux, and then once this gets hot, get a little bit of the solder, just melts off, get a little bead like that, and then just touch it to the copper, let it cool off for a second, and you can see it now. You have some flux attached to the copper. Also, this keeps the threads bound. So we'll do that again. A little bit of flux, a little bead of solder, touch it to the copper threads, let it cool for a second, and there we have it. So now this is done. Got to prep this piece, and to do that, just need to expose a little bit of the copper because right now it's completely covered with plastic. That's pretty simple. Just melt some of the plastic away, just like this. Same on the other side. And that's what you have. So just exposing a little bit is enough. Now before you can solder these to the heat tape, again you got to dip it into the flux. This is what helps bond together, I think. You don't need any more solder. So let me see how I can go about doing this with the camera in my face. Let's see. Okay, so it's this end. You can see a little bit of the flux on there. In fact, I'll get a little bit more. Just like that. And then you just hold it on that exposed copper of the heat tape. And again, just apply. You get a little bit of a singe, which is normal. You just hold it there until the flux and solder melts, and once it does, you want to remove the iron, hold it there for a second until it's bond. Once it cools off, it's going to stay bonded. So we'll do that to the other side. See a little bit of the flux on there. Best way is to hold it without touching any of the metal parts. That one was much quicker, and you can see now it is bonded and it's not going to come apart. Just 7 more to go. So the next thing I want to do is basically put electrical tape and cover all the exposed metal parts. So these corners and these 2 corners. Now before I do that, I'm just going to take a piece of paper towel and just clean off these soldering points, because there was that flux, which is kind of greasy, and it could prevent the electrical tape from sticking properly. So I'm just wiping off the excess that was left over. A little bit is all it takes, and then I'm going to use pieces of electrical tape that I've already cut and seal off all the exposed copper that was cut. So when I cut the heat tape here, I exposed this little edge, so that needs to be sealed up. And of course we have exposed copper and solder points. So I find that it's best to keep things flat as possible. So I'm going to do this side, flip it over, seal up this side. And while I'm here, I'll put a piece of tape on this end as well. Flip it back. Seal this up. Seal that up. And last one. And so now it remains flat rather than wrapping the tape around the wire and causing a big bulge. And it's kind of sloppy looking. This keeps it flat. And then when I put the foil tape over this to adhere it to the rack, it stays nice and flat. Now I just tape the heat pad to the rack with foil tape. I'm only taping 3 sides. I'll tape the back side once the temperature probe is in place. Notice the heat tape protrudes, which allows space for the temperature probe. Next, to close up the back with plastic. I got this from Home Depot. This material is soft enough to cut with scissors, but I find a utility knife makes a much cleaner edge. Notice how the shelves cast a shadow. The shadows help when it comes time to screw the panel into place. If you don't see the shadows, just place a flashlight in the rack. I like to drill pilot holes before driving in the screws. I fasten screws all around the perimeter and then one in the center of each shelf. Now to thread the wire through. I just cut a hole with a utility knife and then push the wire through. That needs to be done for each shelf. Prep all the wires just like you see here. I'm about to show you how to hook up the STC1000. Now this is the temperature controller I had in mind when I built those heat mats. I understand that not everybody's gonna want to use the STC1000. You might have a different device. You might have something that's more plug and play. And in that case, when building the heat mats with the heat tape and wire, you could have left the plug end of the wire intact and just connected the other end to the heat mats so that you could just plug the plug end into the outlet that comes with your temperature controller. But I'm going to be using the STC1000, so let's get started. I have 3 of them, and I'm going to use all 3 of them on this build. One's going to be used for the top 2 tubs, one's going to be used for the middle 3 tubs, and one's going to be used for the bottom 3. We'll just focus on one for now. So let's take a look at what's in this. So it comes in a box, bubble wrapped. And it has the temperature controller, sorry, the temperature probe already attached. And it's got a pretty good length to it. I'm going to use a screwdriver to take off the screw that's on the end. This is just kind of like a shield. And that shield, once you pop it off, you'll see all those ports. Now it's got a little diagram on the back. And you can see the sensor is connected to 3 and 4, which is, again, already provided and connected. The power supply goes into port 1 and 2, and then your heating component hooks up to ports 5 and 6. So a lot of times when you have devices, they're what's called polarized, which means the hot and neutral wire needs to be in a certain orientation for the device to operate properly. And you can see this one doesn't say that, it just has power supply. So that means all it requires you to do is create a circuit, create a complete circuit. So as long as you can create a complete circuit, this thing should operate correctly. Now, if it was polarized, I'll show you. I'm going to use this piece of wire that's left over as an example. So you'll notice that a lot of times you have extension cords, or most extension cords have the 2 prongs on the plug. There's a larger side and there's a smaller side. The smaller side is the hot and the larger side is the neutral. And the reason it's like that is so that you don't accidentally reverse it when you plug it into your outlet. And if you look at your outlet, there's a smaller side and there's a larger side for you to plug in, so you don't accidentally reverse it. And that's important for some devices, like I said, things like, I don't know, a fan where the motor needs to spin in a certain direction to push air in a certain direction. And there's other things that don't require polarization, such as your phone charger. And a quick tip, just in case you are dealing with devices that require these polarization, you'll notice that on the larger end, it's connected to the side of the wire that have these grooves, and on the other side, it's smooth. So when you're working on wiring, say this end, well, it's kind of hard to trace back to which side is the larger side and which side is the smaller side. You'll just have to look for the grooves. So you can see one side has the grooves and one side is smooth. This is the hot and this is the neutral. Alright, so now let's get to hooking up the STC1000. So I've already gone ahead and cut 3 short pieces of wire. 2 are much shorter, 1 is a little bit longer, and I just have black pieces of tape just to help differentiate these 3 pieces. Length and the black tape has no bearing on the way this thing works. So here's that STC again, and if you look in here, you'll see the screw heads. Now they should already be loose. If they're not, go ahead and loosen them. I'm going to be working on ports 1, 2, 5, and 6, and I've already checked they are loose. You can set that STC aside. What you want to do is prepare 3 pieces of wire. Now, I purposely cut 2 short and put black tape on it so you can help differentiate them while I'm working on the camera. And 1 piece is slightly longer, and with all 3 of these I have exposed the ends. So on one side I've exposed about 1/4 of an inch of copper, and then on the other side I've exposed about probably 1/2 of an inch, maybe a little bit more than 1/2 of an inch. So we're going to start with 1 short piece, and we're going to insert the short end into port 1. We're going to take a screwdriver and just crank down that little screw inside until it's tight, and that will lock the wire in place. We're going to take the long wire and insert it into port 2. again cranking down that screw until it's tight. And then the last short piece that goes into port 5. Just like that. Now I'm going to be taking the plug end of that extension cord and I'm going to work on exposing some of the copper on this side. And I'm going to be exposing about, again, 1/2 inch to a little bit more than 1/2 inch. And twist those copper threads together so they stay nice and neat. Just like that. Now what I'll do is put a little piece of blue tape on this one. It's not necessary, but it'll help you guys differentiate the wires and help you follow along. So you'll know that when you see this blue, it's connected to the plug. To make the connection, I'm going to use these winged wire connectors. Now they come in different sizes. For what I'm using are the yellow ones. And remember, this is not a polarized device, so either one works. I'm going to start with the hot side, which if you remember is the one with the smooth sheathing. And I'm just going to twist these 3 together, which are the 2 short black ones. Again, using the wire nut. Twist them until it's tight. The other end of the blue line will leave exposed, as well as the wire that's coming out of port 2. These are going to be used when we hook it up to the wires that are connected to the heat tape. Now remember, I said I'm using an STC1000 to control multiple levels in the rack. This one will control the top 2 levels. The wire with the binder clip is connected to 2 heat tapes, as you can see here. I just basically tied the 3 wires that are smooth together and the 3 wires that are grooved together. Now let's get back to the other end of that same wire with the binder clip on the end, which I've removed temporarily. One side of it gets connected to the plug end, which is the one with the blue tape, as well as the long wire out of port 2. Now that leaves just one exposed wire, and the only place available is port 6 out of the STC1000. Lastly, I'll attach the temperature probe. I just run it back through the holes to one of the 2 heat tapes. You want to make sure it's in direct contact to the black bar of the heat tape, as you can see here. As you can see, this is the final product. And before you add your animals, make sure you turn on the heat. Make sure you dial in that temperature controller, ensuring that it is accurate and consistent. I actually had this on for over a week now without any animals in it. The temperature inside the tub is about 88 to 92. 92 is a little bit high, so I'm going to be dialing it down just slightly. And then it'll be ready for the animals to go into it. As far as the temperature on the temperature controller on that display goes, don't pay that much attention to it. It's going to read high, especially for this STC1000, because it's reading the temperature of the heat pad, not the temperature that's inside the tub. So the heat pad's going to run a little bit hot. I pointed a heat gun to the heat pad and it was reading like 116 or 120 degrees. and that's fine. That's expected. What you want to do is make sure you read the temperature that's inside the tub, because that's the one that actually counts. So good luck with this build. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, please give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. If you want to be informed of future videos, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. As always, thanks for watching. Please share, and I'll see you guys next time.